All right, back to our virtual tour of Israel. We are quite a ways into it, taking a physical trip through the Holy Land, but using the concept of hospitality, and I think generosity could be added into there now after that conversation. And then also tables, food, how that fits into the process and to the ministry that God has called us into. The 4 tables being the heavenly banquet table that's in heaven that we are going to, where the Father is the host. Jesus' table, communion, where he is the host. Our tables, where we are the hosts, and their tables. It's interesting to me. The graphics changed since I put them on there. So I'm curious how that happened. So interesting. Just what I'm watching as we're in this morning. All right, so we started out along the Mediterranean coast, and what we haven't talked about is the tribes. We talk about the tribes settled in the different areas of Israel, and I thought I would point out a little bit about where the tribes are. So on day 1, we cover along the Mediterranean coast the tribes of Manasseh and Dan and Asher. The second day, Zebulun and Issachar and Naphtali. Day 3 is Naphtali, Manasseh, and Dan. And then we went to Dan. Day 4, this is actually, we covered last week, and there was a problem with the PowerPoints as we did that. So I wanted to correct it. So I'm going to go through those slides, not through all the conversation, but the slides, just so that you can see some of the things I pointed to. Where we went to Mount Hermon, first of all, specifically taking the trolley to the top. And then to Banyas, where the gates of hell are, where Jesus asked the disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" And he was pointing to this rock of worship, which is also the gates of hell, where this waterfall had historically come from. The water had come out of there. And then also, that's where that is actually. That was the temple that was there. The picture at the bottom is what it would have looked like in the day of the time of Jesus, with the temples there to the different gods. Caesarea Philippi, also from there to Tel Dan, where the Abrahamic gate. This gate is 4,000 years old, something like that. It would have stood there. Abraham may have walked through those very gates, that very gate. Dan is the city where the tribe of Dan settled. It also became the capital of the idolatrous worship of the northern kingdom of Israel, which is where this altar was built. They discovered the altar of the northern Israel kingdom. One of the Baal calf altars was here. And then also they discovered the Iron Age gates, which you see over there. I want you to pay attention to, this is the gate where the bema is, where the king or the judge would have sit at the time. This is more of what it would have looked like when it was reconstructed at the time. So you see it. We're going to come on this a little bit later as we talk about sitting at the city gates. This is the closest picture of something from that time that you would see. All right. Also discovered at Dan was the Mesha stele, which is a stone from the Moabite kingdom. Pay attention to this stele. We're going to talk about this later as well. This was discovered, and it's a secular reference to the house of David, because it's the first one discovered where David is mentioned outside the Bible. And this was actually from an enemy of Israel that they said they had defeated the house of David. And that's, you can see it little highlighted over in the corner there. From there, to Hamat Gader, which is an ancient Roman hot springs. Again, there's a crocodile farm there and stuff like that. And then, overnights. Day 5. Oh, there we go. Day 5 was to go down, crossing through the territory of Manasseh into Samaria. Samaria, just as a reminder, just to give you a little bit of context, after the death of Solomon, so I've put the tribes up there where the tribal territories are, so you can see them. From Benjamin, and Dan was split into 2 territories. A couple of them were split into multiple territories. Manasseh was in 2 territories. But everything from north of Judah, see Jerusalem is here, everything north of here rebelled against the house of David, against Rehoboam. and they became the northern kingdom of Israel. The southern kingdom of Judah was everybody else. So everybody else went north. So that's those tribes went up there. And then after the Assyrians came in and conquered the capital of the Northern Empire was Mount Gerizim right in here. Once that was defeated, and they were taken into exile, all the leaders, there was a people that was the remnant that stayed behind, and that remnant became what we call the Samaritans. And so the Samaritans, this area right now would be what's called Samaria. This is part of the west bank of Israel. The Jordan River goes down the middle, and the west bank is on this side. Samaria is a part of the Palestinian controlled area that's there now. And the Samaritan people also still live there. In that area. Does that make sense? Just to give you a little geographical context. Yeah. Jordan River goes right down the center from the Sea of Galilee all the way down to the Dead Sea. That's what connects them. Water comes from Mount Hermon and goes straight south. Is that helpful? Okay. Don't want to get too lost in the details, but I do want you to understand. So we're actually going to go to the city of Shiloh, which is right there in the middle, which is in Ephraim. Which one of the 12 sons of Jacob is Ephraim? Joseph. He's not one of the 12 sons. Joseph is one of the 12 sons. Ephraim and Manasseh are the two. Ephraim and Manasseh become the centerpiece of Samaria. That's going to be that tribe. So they're sons of Joseph. It was the first religious capital of for 369 years. It was the religious and political capital of the Hebrew people because they didn't have a king. This is actually Shiloh. Is this synagogue was built to look like the tabernacle that it was built there. From there, we go to the Elah Valley, where David and Goliath fought Goliath. We're looking from the city of Tel Azekah, which is a Philistine stronghold, and to Beit Guvrin and Tel Maresha, underground city. We'll do an archaeological dig there. Bell Caves, Lachish, at the same time. It's so funny. It's always on this picture for some reason that it doesn't do this. This is the Bedouin tents. We stay overnight in the Bedouin tents, and hospitality. You sleep and eat with them the way they would have. You can see the camel hair carpets on the walls and the roof. It's all made out of camel hair. It's amazing in the way that it protects you from the elements. Having slept through several storms, both dust storms and rainstorms in the desert, I can tell you they're amazing structures for something so primitive as they are. So in that area, we have traveled through the territories of Ephraim, Judah, and Simeon now. And this place is called Han Hashariot, which would have been on the screen, but for some reason is not. I think it's because I'm using Google Docs. I think Google Docs takes my PowerPoint and changes things. So I'm going to work on that this week. So sorry about that. So what you would have noticed that it would have been on there is that the name Hashariot, H-A, and then another capital H. Anytime you see the word H-A, it's the definitive article the. So this is, Han is the N of Hashariot. It's the N of the, I forgot. Sorry, I'll tell you next time. Anyway, you get to sleep like Abraham here. And we talked about this because this is what we talked about last week. You get to sleep like Abraham in those tents. And the Bedouin people view themselves as the inheritors of the lifestyle of Abraham, specifically the lifestyle of hospitality. Hospitality is super important to them. And for today, day 6, we're going to continue that conversation as we move down into the Negev. So sleeping right around here. And then this is Beersheba. And we're going to end up in Arad and Masada and Engedi as we go along. So the Negev, the word Negev means south. And so it's the southern land of Israel. Over 50% of the land of Israel is this Negev, this desert area. Well, let me talk about this first. It's mostly in the tribe of Simeon was their territory. And after the Israelites were kicked out, the Nabateans came through here, and they become the people who make the city of Petra. If you've heard about the city of Petra, they're the ones who built that rock city, the Red Rock City there. So we're going to start the day with a camel ride. Might see some faces in there that you know. In the deserts in the morning. And from there, we're going to go to kind of their version of the Grand Canyon called Maktesh Ramon. Maktesh is an interesting phenomenon that only happens in Israel, though. It looks like the Grand Canyon, but it's not. The Grand Canyon is formed by rivers coming in and out and doing that thing. And Maktesh is something. Maktesh means mortar and pestle. So you have a mortar and a pestle, and it's something with really high walls, but a deep valley. But only one river comes into it and goes out of it. And so it only goes out one way. That's a phenomenon that's only seen in Israel. This crater is 24 miles long by 5 miles wide. It's 1,600 feet deep, and it's a geological paradise for geologists because of the strata that are in there. They see all kinds of fossils and things like that. They love to go through that. There once was a volcano in the middle of it. We will pass, just look over the edge. We're not going to go into it. Beautiful. Yeah, that's a hotel that's on the side. That's called Mitzpeh, which is the overlook, Mitzpeh Ramon, which means overlook. From there, we will go to, I just decided I don't like Google Docs. So Mitzpeh Ramon, from there, we're going to Beersheba, and Beersheba, B-E-E-R, like, two E's, beer means well in Hebrew. Shiva means 7 or covenants. And so this is built on the place where Abraham's well is. And that's where that middle one is there. This Tel Beersheba, what's the Tel again? Yeah, I got those layers. There is a Tel there called Beersheba, which is an ancient city of Beersheba that you can go into, and you climb into the well, because this is how they would get down. That's actually how they would get their water. They would go down into, because they trap the water inside. So if the enemies come, the water's not outside the walls. So they build it inside, but then you go inside, and there's these vast caverns inside that you go to. Yes, that's our group right there. So that's at Tel Beersheba. Beersheba is the southernmost. Now we talked about Dan, which is the northernmost part of the Israeli territory, right? Beersheba is the southernmost inhabited place, because from there it's all deserts and nomads from there down in that south. But the southernmost city, which is one of the largest cities in Israel, is Beersheba. And it's the center now of agriculture. It's also center of, it's kind of their Silicon Valley is down there, and a lot of research and stuff like that. Cherry tomatoes were invented in this territory, by the way. Because of the high salinity in the water, they invented cherry tomatoes to be able to grow with the high salinity in the water. It's 270 miles between Dan, the northernmost part, and Beersheba, the southernmost part. How far is it to San Francisco? 600 miles, I think, something like 600 miles. So that tells you how big the nation of Israel is. It's not that big, from the northernmost to the southernmost part. Now that's between those biblical, the biblical nation, not the current nation. The current nation goes all the way down to Lot, which is a little bit bigger than that. Much of the biblical stories that we see in the book of Genesis happen in the Negev, around Beersheba specifically those stories related to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. A lot of those stories are in there, beginning from Genesis chapter 12 through most of the book. When they end up going to Egypt, Isaac ends up going to they look for a wife for Isaac. Jacob ends up going to look for a wife for 7 years. So there's a couple things, but they all end up back in Beersheba until they end up in Egypt. Genesis 21, this is where King Abimelech was the king of the Philistines. They were butting heads, fighting over water wells, because they're in the desert, they're out in the middle of nowhere. So they're fighting over water, of course, for their flocks. But this is also where Abraham goes with his wife, and the king offers Abraham hospitality. Why? So he can get his sister. So he wants his sister. So it's a false sense of hospitality because he's trying to get something out of it, right? Abraham then, after the Lord reveals it that this is really his wife and you better let her go, he blesses him, sends him out, and they end up making a covenant at Beersheba. Shiva also means seven. It means seven and covenant. So it could be either one. It could be the well of the covenant or the well of the seven, because there's 7 wells that are made in there. And they also use 7 lambs to sign the covenant. They killed 7 lambs when they did that. So we don't know exactly, but that's kind of the way that goes. Also here, Abraham, see that tree in the end? That's called a tamarisk tree. Anybody knows what a tamarisk? You're familiar with tamarisk trees? They have really interesting, almost pine, needle, Norfolk pine, almost kind of needles on them. They're a really interesting tree because in the morning, they actually drip water and salt. You can lick the leaves and there's salt on them. They kind of bleed salt as they grow. But Abraham planted a tamarisk tree, and that's where he called on the name of Yahweh when he called on him to worship. Yeah, it kind of does look like a crab walking through the desert, doesn't it? So there's many other biblical visions and things that happen there. Isaac, stuff happens with him there. Jacob, Hagar, when she's running away, she ends up under a tamarisk tree when she's there. Elijah is there in 1 Kings chapter 19. Israel is in Beersheba when they decide, hey, we don't want judges anymore. We want a king. 1 Samuel chapter 18. So Beersheba is a hugely important city in the Bible, but it's pretty much a forgotten city in terms of knowledge and people visiting and stuff like that. The tell that's there is not from the time of Abraham. The tell is from the time of Hezekiah. So it's much later there. There is an altar that was found there, a complete altar they know what altars physically look like because there's been several of them found. One of them was found in there. From there, we go a little bit north to the Dead Sea, to the fortress of Masada. See the Dead Sea in the background up in the very corner back there? So we're looking southbound. It's a Herodian fortress that was built. When the city of Jerusalem was destroyed, a bunch of zealots escaped here and ended up committing suicide rather than being taken captive. They had enough food and water to outlast the Roman Empire. And so the Romans decided, there's no such thing as a siege here. We actually have to break through the walls. So they built a ramp up to this fortress as they're being attacked with arrows and stuff like that. And they actually broke through the walls. And as they were breaking through the walls, the Jews picked 10 men to kill everybody else. Everyone killed their own family. And then the 10 men killed everybody else. And then one of the 10 had to commit suicide, so that he was the only one that committed suicide. So this becomes the battle cry of the Israeli people even today. All the new military soldiers go there on their graduation because they say, never again. We will never allow ourselves to be subjugated to another people again. So that's a huge, but these are the fortresses of Herod on the end. He had massive amounts of, years worth of supplies were stored in this place. From there, stop along the Dead Sea, a place called Kibbutz Kaila, and that's where we will spend the night. All right, go from there. You can see Jordan on the other side. Dead Sea, it's dead because there's nothing in it. It's absolutely dead because the salt levels are too low. We'll talk about that next time. All right. Once we had a visitor at our house who brought their dog along, and they were staying the night, and their dog was aggressive, overly aggressive. We had a pretty big dog at the time. He was a big chocolate lab and really sweet guy, but this other dog was really aggressive. And the guests, instead of controlling their dog, asked us to put him outside. And can you imagine, have you ever had a guest that has kind of taken over your house and kind of looks like everybody's shaking their head? Everybody has one example in the midst of it. Sometimes hospitality, we talked about hospitality last week and how Abraham is the father of hospitality, not only just in scripture, but most Bedouins are Muslims. For the whole Middle East, they all look to Abraham as the example of hospitality, and they want to do that. But sometimes hospitality it stops being fun, and it becomes a dilemma, especially when we've had times when families have come in. We've had several art objects that were broken by visitors, and you have to make a choice of, like, is it about the person or is it about the object? And clearly it always has to be about the object. But at the same time, sometimes it just feels like your hospitality is being abused by people. And how do you make that choice? Yes, what?
It always has to be about the person.
Yes, did I not say that?
We follow.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. See, that thing happens, right? All right, so from Masada, this is from Masada, and you're looking over Masada, that fortress that's up in the air, and Kalia, the kibbutz that's just north of there. You can see across the Dead Sea. You can see the Dead Sea is dying. It's actually drying up, and this is a conundrum in the Middle East because it is also a place of mineral deposits and stuff like that. But because fresh water is so precious, no one, Jordan and Israel and Syria, no one lets fresh water continue to go into it. And so it's getting saltier and saltier, and it's evaporating. So they're in the process of figuring out what they're going to do with the Dead Sea. If they're going to actually dig a tunnel from the ocean and allow salt water to come in, but what does that do to the biology of the lake and stuff like that? So anyway, that's going. But anyway, you can see on the other side, you can see the dry riverbeds or the dry lake bed that's developing, that's there. And you see Jordan. Moab is in the south, the Moabites, and Ammonites are in the north. And in the land of the Ammonites, now this is in the future. This will be important as we talk about this story. Currently, that's not who is there. Or in the time of Abraham, there's no Moabites, there's no Ammonites yet, but they will be important peoples, enemies of Israel in the future. Just wanted to point out where they are because we're going to talk about them in just a minute. But the city of Sodom is on the other side. You see Sodom? That's up there. So you can see from basically Abraham's house was just behind Masada up on the hill. You can see down in the valley, you can see the Jordan Valley, and you can see where the city of Sodom is. Good? Okay, that's the context of where we are. The Moabites are the ones where the Misha Stela comes from. Remember, I told you that was found that they conquered the house of David? They're the ones that did that. Up in the north, the Ammonites, today the city of Amman, Jordan, was the capital. It's not Ammon, the way we'd say it's Amman. We say Amman now, but it takes its name from the Ammonite people. So that still has a little bit of that remnants there. So on our trip yesterday, we were in that Bedouin camp. Remember, we left the Bedouin camp this morning. We talked about Abraham being the father of hospitality by hosting the angel of the Lord in that place, Genesis chapter 18. As we move from Genesis chapter 18 to Genesis chapter 19, and the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, we often view those as unrelated stories. But in fact, it's a continuation of the same story talking about hospitality, and we're going to see that as we go. So from here, from Abraham's place, you can see what happened to the angels after they left Abraham in the tent when it happened in chapter 18. So we're going to start in Genesis chapter 18, beginning at verse 16. Then the men, the angels, set out from there, and they looked down towards Sodom. And Abraham went with them to set them on their way, because this is what you would do for hospitality. You take your guests. For us, we take them to the front door. To them, they took them to the end of their territory. They're responsible to take their guests to the end of their territory. Verse 17, Yahweh said, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do, seeing that Abraham will surely become a great and mighty nation, and the nations of the earth shall be blessed through him. For I have chosen him that he has commanded his children and his household after him to keep the way of Yahweh by doing righteousness and justice, so that Yahweh may be to Abraham what he promised him. Then Yahweh said to Abraham, because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great and their sin is so grave, I will go down to see whether they have done altogether according to their outcry that has come to me, and if not, I will know. So the men, the angels, turned from there and went towards Sodom, but Abraham stood before Yahweh. Then Abraham drew near and said, will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you then sweep away the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous in it? So then they get into this conversation, this bargain, where Abraham's bargaining on behalf of the city. And it starts with 50, but Abraham knows where his nephew is, Lot is, and he knows that this isn't a righteous city. And he starts questioning himself, well, maybe they won't find, what about 45? What about 25? What about 20? And they get down to 10 because he's convinced. He's counting Abraham, he's counting Lot, he's counting his wife, he's counting his 2 daughters, and he heard they're getting married. So there should be at least 6 of them that are there. Surely it would be, they've influenced enough people for there to be 10 righteous people in this city. So that's what he's counting on. So we leave Abraham with that. And then chapter 19, beginning at verse 1. The 2 angels, remember the angel of the Lord stayed back with Abraham, and the other 2 angels that went with them. As Abraham's bargaining, he's no longer, the angel of the Lord is no longer with these 2 angels, but they came, the remaining 2, to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting at the gate of Sodom. Remember what we talked about the gate, sitting at the gates? Leaders would sit at the gates. That's what they did. Oftentimes the king would sit at the gates and he would render judgment there. This is where things happened at the city gates. Elders of the city would sit at the city gates. You could find witnesses. If you had to do a contract, you would find witnesses there because there was enough people that would say, oh yeah, I saw that happen. I was there when that happened. Boaz was at the gate when he redeemed Ruth, if you remember that story. David's son Absalom in 2 Samuel 15 went to the gates because he was trying to influence the people and he would judge them. So he would gain favor with the people from the city gates. This was a normal place. So Lot was at the city gates where he should have been as a citizen that was trying to be a good citizen, a man of influence while he was there. Probably not alone. He's probably socializing with the others until events come along. And all of a sudden these guys come into the gates. Verse 1, when Lot saw them, he rose to meet them. Now remember, in the last chapter, verse 18, we see Abraham, again, as the father of hospitality. He did this. He did what we're about to see. In the ancient desert, hospitality was about pride. It had become this thing that if you can't provide hospitality, you are not a man. So that means if you don't have guests come, then you can't prove your manhood. So you're anxious to find people to come to your doorstep. So much so that you always left the one flap of your tent open as a sign of hospitality. It's like leaving the front door open to your house. People are more likely to come in if it's open than if it's closed. And then the second thing is you should be home as much as possible so that if someone comes by, you're not going to miss them. Now we're talking about out in the middle of the desert. Sometimes Bedouins lived in communities and there was gatherings in communities, and sometimes there was these cities. But it was always this concept of hospitality that you're eager to prove yourself, prove your pride. When I was a missionary in Romania, this was the thing. Whenever you went to someone's house, they had to serve you better than the last person served you. So they would bring out everything, even if that meant at their expense, that when you left, they wouldn't have food because they wanted to make sure that you had the best. But it wasn't because they had this sense of wanting to bless you as much as it was, I need to do this because I don't want people to find out I was not a good host, right? So there's this sense of pride that's attached to it. If you were in a community that had people that would come as guests would come in, everybody, if there's only 1 or 2 guests and they're in a group together, you're not going to split them up. So you come out and you would fight over who got to take the guests home. No, I'll take them. No, I'll take them. You took the last one. It's my turn. There was this kind of, it could get negative and you had to choose who you had to go with. And hospitality is meant to be about, remember what we talked about last week, not to take the outsider and make them feel like an insider. Having the outsider feel like they're part of the family, like they get the rights of a family. Remember, your family, your kids, it's not a privilege for them to get food. It's not a privilege for them it's your responsibility as part of the family. So a guest is to be brought from the outside in, and they're given those same privileges or the same rights as being a part of the family. You giving them food and shelter is a right that they have, not just a privilege. Does that make sense? So taking the outsider, bringing them in, making them a part of it. So it's supposed to be about that, and yet it has become something about pride, and that's going to play itself out as we continue the story. So Lot bowed himself with his face to the earth, and he said, "My lords, please turn aside to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you will rise up early and go on your way." So this is the same thing that happened in the story of Abraham. Abraham bowed before them. It's not because he knew who they were. They, at this point in the story, just think they're normal visitors. They're not seeing, there's no glow around them. There's no like heavenly voices or the sound of waters happening when they talk. These are normal people that they're doing their best to provide for. Abraham was standing at his gate, at his tent. The gate flap was open. Visitors come by. He rushes out. Please come in, my lords, to my house. Now, when he says that Lord, and Martha had mentioned last week that it's the word Adonai, and Adonai is the plural version of lords, which is what they would call someone who, anywhere, even today, someone, if you talk to someone by their family name, you would say Adon and their last name. You don't say, so Adon is not the name for God alone. It's the name of someone who is above you, someone that you're trying to appeal to. So the word is Adon or plural Adonai when you bring them here, but it does not mean God. So he's not, when he sees these men and he's bowing to them, this is not an act of worship. This is an act of, please let me be the one who gets to host you. Does that make sense? And all the commentators believe this. So this isn't not just me making this up. So what's that?
What part?
Now, hopefully you got to figure that part out. So let me see. So both of them, both Abraham and Lot, are offering them food. It says Lot offers him a feast, and they talk about the kinds of feasts that they offer him. We'll talk about that in just a moment. They offer them food and water to wash their feet and a place to rest until they continue your journey. This isn't meant to come live with me. This is as you continue your journey, stop. So there's this almost a formula. We see these two parallel stories of Abraham and Lot. You see the parallel? Okay, because I want you to see that that's what's going on. That's why we have to talk about these two stories together. So the visitors said, no, we're going to spend the night in the town square, but he pressed them strongly. Remember, this is my opportunity to prove who I am. So I need you to come stay with me. So I'm going to do my best to prove. This is kind of like when you get to the end of you go to dinner with somebody or lunch with someone at the end of the bill. It's like, who gets to pay? No, let me pay. No, let me pay. It becomes this little awkward exchange. Same kind of thing that's going on here. All right. So they turned aside to him and entered into his house, and he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. The interesting thing here, exactly the same thing. He's offering them everything, but the unleavened bread means they didn't let the bread rise, which means he did it really quickly. Abraham told Sarah, knead it, right? Because that's what you do with leavened bread. You knead it, you let it rise, you knead it a couple of times. And he also killed the animal. So it took 3 or 4 hours for that to happen with Abraham. We're getting the fast food version of it with Lot. Verse 4. But before they lay down to sleep, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, and all the people to the last man surrounded the house. Remember, if it was a normal city, people should have been arguing to host these guys. There should have been no opportunity for them to sleep in the square. And I wonder if maybe the test to find the 6 or 8 or 10 or 20 or more righteous people, I wonder if sleeping in the square was their test to see how many people would actually come out and say, come stay in my house. Because remember, they didn't say this with Abraham. When they went to Abraham, he says, come stay. And they're like, okay, do as you say. But when they get to Lot and they say, come stay in my house, he goes, no, we're going to sleep in the square, which doesn't end up happening. But it's a good thing because you know what's about to happen. Everyone in town heard that they were there. They came to the door. It says everyone. It's very clear that this is universal. This is citywide. They are all there. And their none is innocent. And to remember that bargain, we just have to find 4 more people, assuming that the sons-in-law are righteous. And then it says, they called out to Lot, where are the men that you came to town with you? Bring them out to us that we may know them. To be clear, the word know is the same word in Genesis 4 that Adam knew Eve and bore him a son. It's the same word. So just to let you know what's going on there. Verse 6 says, Lot went out to the men at the entrance. They shut the door after him and said, I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Behold, I have 2 daughters who have not known any man. Let me bring them out to you and do to them as you please. Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof. Okay, so all of us are focused on the fact that what the heck did he just do to his daughters, right? And righteously so, you should feel that. But at the same time, I also want you to notice the very end of the sentence that says, for they have come under the shelter of my roof. Underline that. Hospitality, in his mind, was such an important, valuable thing that he was willing to sacrifice his daughters. This happens in another story later in Scripture, the book of Judges. The same kind of thing happens, and the girl that's left outside doesn't make it through the night. So this isn't just like, hey, girls, go do your duty and come back in. This is he sacrificing his daughters because there's a mob outside the doors. This is a hospitality phrase that this ends up with. So if you want to know his motivation, this is how he viewed how important hospitality was to him, that he was willing to sacrifice his daughters. It may seem wrong to us, and I'll say I want you to be very clear. It is wrong, but I want you to also hear his mentality. No justification. I just want you to understand his mentality in that, how far people took this oath of hospitality that they had. Now, just because the Bible tells it doesn't mean the Bible teaches it. Just because the Bible tells this story doesn't mean this is the way we're supposed to act. I want that to be clear as we move forward. There's lots of bad stuff in the Bible, and just because the Bible records it doesn't mean that that's the way we're supposed to handle it. Judges chapter 11 and 12, which is probably one of the biggest collections of all the stuff you shouldn't do. Jephthah, he's the guy who wins this battle, and he says, whatever comes out of my house right away, that's the thing that I'm going to sacrifice to the Lord, which of course is his daughter. And instead of recognizing that was just stupid, I'm not going to do that, he keeps his promise because his oath has become more to him than his daughter. Just because the Bible teaches it, tells it, doesn't mean the Bible teaches it. Does that make sense? All right. So this is perverted. It's a perverted sense of what hospitality is meant to be in the place it is supposed to have. In the same way, in Gideon, chapter 6, he lays out the fleece. God is not saying lay out fleeces. He's telling a story. He's not teaching the way we're supposed to do. God doesn't teach this kind of hospitality. This is hospitality gone wrong. It's become about his pride. I have to protect these visitors. They're in my house at this time. It's a perverted sense of hospitality. He should protect his daughters and find some other way to protect his guest. But his daughters really ought to be. There's other commandments in Scripture, and hospitality is something we're supposed to do, but not at the sake of the other commandments of Scripture. Verse 9, it says, the people said, stand back. And they said, this fellow came in here to sojourn, and he has become our judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them. So the city offered him hospitality to come in only as long as he played the game. So talk about a perverse sense of hospitality. Now they're withdrawing their hospitality from him as well. Then they pressed hard against the man Lot and drew near to break down the door, but the men reached out their hands and brought Lot into the house, but with them shut the door, and they struck them with blindness, the men who were at the entrance of the house, both small and great. Even blindness wasn't enough to say. I mean, can you imagine the intensity of that whole thing? So they wore themselves out grasping for the door. Talk about the commitment. I would think that if you lost, I'd be so shocked I'd be stunned, I would imagine, but somehow that isn't what happened. Then the men said to Lot, have you anyone else here, sons-in-law, sons, daughters, or anyone else you have in the city, bring them out to this of the place, for we are about to destroy this place, because the outcry against its people has come great before Yahweh, and Yahweh has sent us out to destroy it. So Lot went out and said to his sons-in-law, who were about to marry his daughters, up, get out of the city, for Yahweh is about to destroy the city. But he seemed to his sons-in-law to be jesting. So if he had godly sons-in-law, they would have believed their father-in-law, but they didn't. So that 6 now comes down to 4, assuming that everybody else in the family is righteous. And if they had come, they would have had the 6, but right now they're down to 4. As morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city. But he lingered. So the men seized him and his wife and his 2 daughters by the hand, Yahweh being merciful to him, and brought him out and set him outside the city. Had Yahweh not been merciful, he would have left him there, but he was, and he pulled him out. Why was he so reluctant to leave? What was he holding on to? We know later in the New Testament, Lot is called a righteous man. So something else is going on here. And I think it has to do with his family. his wife and daughters. So it's not his sons-in-laws, it's his wife and daughters. And guess what? We're going to see how that plays out in the future. What's up with his wife and daughters? Verse 17, as they brought them out, one said, escape for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the hills, lest you be swept away. Remember this line in just a moment, because I'm about to tell you something scientifically that will make this line more sense in just a moment. And Lot said to them, oh no, my lords, behold, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have shown me kindness in saving my life, but I cannot escape to the hills, lest the disaster overtake me and die. Behold, this city is near enough to flee, and it is a little one. Let me escape to there. Is it not a little one? You keep saying little one, it's just a little city. It's one of the cities that had been, it wasn't just Sodom and Gomorrah that were committed to, that were going to be destroyed. It was all these cities. And this little one was one of them, and my life will be saved. So like Abraham, Lot bargains. It's a different kind of bargain. He is bargaining for the city. The city does become spared because of the bargaining of Lot. And he said to him, behold, I grant this favor also, that I will not overthrow the city of which he has spoken. Escape quickly, for I can do nothing until you arrive there. Therefore, the name of the city is Zoar, which means little or insignificant. This little or insignificant little city. Couple things. It's amazing to me. Well, remind me of this in just a sec. We'll talk about it. So 23, the sun had risen on the earth when Lot came to Zoar, this little tiny insignificant city. Then Yahweh rained down on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from Yahweh out of heaven, and he overthrew those cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants of the cities and whatever grew on the ground. Here's the really interesting thing. Really, I talked about the scientific part of it. In 2021, all the major news agencies reported that they had they discovered the cause of the destruction of the valley, which they included in Sodom and Gomorrah. The Smithsonian Magazine reported that many of the cities of the valley were destroyed by an exploding comet around 1650 BC, right around this time. And about 50,000 people had died. Listen to this quote. This is, you can Google it, it's all over. It's not just like one place. Researchers concluded that warfare, a fire, a volcanic eruption on the earth were unlikely culprits, as even these would not have produced an intense enough heat to cause the melting recorded at the scene. What they discovered scientifically was a city that was burned so hot that fires, even volcanoes, were not hot enough to cause this heat. That left a space rock as the most likely cause. Because experts failed to find a crater at the site, they attributed the damage to an airburst created when a meteor or comet traveled through the atmosphere at a high speed. It would have exploded about 2.5 miles above the city in a blast 1,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb at Hiroshima, writes the co-author of the study, Christopher Moore, an archaeologist with the University of South Carolina, for the conversation. Air temperatures rapidly rose above 3,600 degrees Fahrenheit. Moore explains clothing, wood immediately burst into flames. Swords, spears, mud bricks, and pottery began to melt almost immediately because the entire city was on fire. So the comet comes in, explodes in the sky, and explodes it down there. And now you may say, but that's not, God raining from heaven. Here's the thing. God warned Lot. He knew it was coming. And he controlled the explosion. So he said, I can't do anything until you get out of here. So get out of here. So he's holding back, this comet in space might be slowing down or speeding up based on how many times Lot turns around to take a deep breath or stops for, to catch his breath on the way out there. So no matter what you say, it doesn't bother me that it was a comet. It actually speaks to me that God uses natural things to accomplish his will. And hopefully that's helpful to you. Fascinating to me, the whole valley is covered with destroyed. There's several cities that they've discovered that have been destroyed this way. And the city of Lot, Sodom, they believe, is a city that they call Tel Hamim. Tel, you know that already. Hamim is the place that's there. Fascinating, right? All right. So as they were escaping in the morning, so again, this is Abraham's view of the sea from across. Sodom is back in that corner over on the other side of the lake. As they were escaping that morning, Lot's wife behind him looked back and became a pillar of salt. I'm going to tell you, if there's an atomic bomb going on behind me, it would be really hard for me not to look. Right? I mean, I don't know. I don't care who you are. So I don't blame her for wanting to look. I don't think the Lord would blame her for wanting to look. I don't think that's what's happening here. I think it's because her heart is so attached to the city. She's heartbroken because she's seeing the city she loves and wants to still be in being destroyed. It's a sign of where her longing is. And I think that's what's going on there. If you have an addiction, at some point, you have to break it completely. You have to walk away. You can't look back. Now, if you're in a relationship with someone that you really, but it's an unhealthy relationship, at some point you need a clean break and you got to walk away. You can't take texts anymore. Can't take phone calls. You can't go out on friend dates or anything. You just got to have a clean date, a clean break. That's what's going on here. And she doesn't want to do that. She still is yearning to go back to that city. And so that's where the judgment comes from. The Lord knew this when he warned them not to look back. So she had a harder time leaving than Lot did. And I think that's where that delay came from. I think Lot is in there saying, come on, honey, it's time to go, time to go, time to go. And she's like dilly-dallying, saying, but I want to take the picture from your Aunt Susie, and I want to take, and I want the photo albums, and but what about my favorite couch? And what, she's going, and he's like, we just got to get out of here. Verse 27, Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before Yahweh, where we're standing here, this lookout point. And he looked down towards Sodom and Gomorrah and toward the land of the valley. And he looked, and behold, the smoke of the land went up like a smoke of a furnace. So I don't think that's too far off. Probably when you see an exploding comet, I don't think that's too far off what it probably would have looked like. Again, he could have seen this from the other side of the sea. Verse 29. So it was that when God destroyed the cities of the valley, God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in which Lot lived. Clearly, Lot had an unhealthy family. And look what happens to his daughters at the end of the chapter. Now, Lot went up to that little tiny city called Zoar, and he lived in the hills with his two daughters, for he was afraid to live in Zoar. So he gets to the city and he's like, man, these are just as bad as, and he finally realized what had happened. But the only reason this city was spared was because he interceded for them. And he realizes, and he's afraid of it. He doesn't want his daughters to marry that because he already had them engaged to some guys that were just like the guys of the city. Doesn't want that to happen again. So of course the girls are like, well, there's nobody else left. If you don't want us to marry those guys, who else is there? Everybody's like that. So he was afraid to live there. So he lived in a cave with his two daughters. And then there's this terrible story. Again, just because the Bible teaches it or tells it doesn't mean the Bible teaches it. These two girls, they're afraid that they're never going to have children. They're going to end up dying in a cave with their old dad, stinky dad. And so they did this terrible thing. They end up getting pregnant with him. And verse 36 says, thus both the daughters of Lot became pregnant by their father. The firstborn bore a son and named him Moab. He's the son of the Moabites on the map in the south. Zoar was in Moabite territory. The younger also bore a son and called his name Ben-Ami, and he is the father of the Ammonites to this day. Again, the city of Ammon becomes their capital in the future. So now what? Lot had this twisted sense of hospitality. It was more about his pride. Some of us have kind of the opposite view of the same problem. We don't provide hospitality because of pride. We're afraid that our houses aren't pretty enough or clean enough, or we don't know how to host people in our houses, or having people in our house, well, their kids may break one of my porcelain dolls or get my carpets dirty or something like that. Lot, unfortunately, chose his pride over his girls. That's just heartbreaking. And the more heartbreaking thing is his daughters heard it happen. They recognized that. They recognized that they were not precious to their father. So no wonder they ended up so far off base, and what they were doing didn't seem. Not only was it they were infected by the city of Sodom, but they saw their father as not valuing them any more than the men of the city did. He was so worried about making these outsiders feel like insiders that being an insider in this family lost its meaning. It didn't mean anything to him or his girls. He was too permissive. He couldn't get all the girls out of the house when it was important for them to go. Jesus tells us to be in the world, but not of it, right? There is a distinction. It's not a free-for-all. The other extreme of that is you can be too strict, that there's no grace or mercy at all within the family. Not in my house, which alienates people and ends up chasing, that would have chased the girls out at the same time. The prodigal father is our model for parenting. No matter, we're not affirming the choices that they make, but sometimes we have to let them fall on their faces so that when they do fall down, they recognize when it's time to come home, mom and dad are waiting for us when they get there. Sometimes our mouths get ahead of us and we make promises that get us into bad situations. Lord, I'll, if I get this job, I will, or if you heal me, I will, whatever. And sometimes we need to recognize that keeping your promise is worse than not keeping your promise. God will not expect you to violate your principles or his other laws just to keep your vow to be hospitable. There will always be a third option. There will always be a way to honor him and to honor others, to love him and to love others. Father, thank you that you, again, make it so simple for us, but we make it so complicated. We take something that is so simple and make it into something legalistic, like hospitality becoming about pride. Father, help us to scrape away the expectations that we put on some of this stuff so that we can see your way. In Jesus' name, amen.